I'm Kayla Mansfield, and I will be moderating this session, modeling approach to cost-effective stormwater planning. Presenting today, we have Stephanie Truitt. Stephanie is a water quality manager for King County, working on the water quality benefits evaluation toolkit. She is a licensed geologist and has her master's degree in geology from Western Washington University, with a background in hydrologic modeling and groundwater quality, and is passionate about improving water quality in the Puget Sound. Greyell has worked with King County since 2013, helping wastewater and stormwater managers with issues related to toxic chemicals in the environment. During this time, she has worked on projects addressing pathways of priority pollutants to the lower Duwamish waterway, studies on stormwater treatment effectiveness, and strategic planning efforts related to stormwater management and water quality improvements. So, welcome.
Thank you. Let's see, can everyone hear me in the back? Okay, all right. Yeah, so my name is Carly Greyell. I'm here with King County Water and Land Resources Division, and we're excited today to talk a little bit about our Water Quality Benefits Evaluation Toolkit, or WQBE, as you'll hear us refer to it. So this came about as part of our executive's initiative for clean water, healthy habitat. So looking at bringing all of the work we do across the county towards better environment for people in the environment, for salmon, for orca, and really trying to focus in on what's going to bring about the best outcomes fastest. And so a piece of this was bringing together some of the science that would help us determine some of that. So that's where the water quality benefits evaluation came in, looking at supporting data-driven outcomes-based investments. So I always like to set up the frame that the WQBE toolkit is not where decisions get made. So it is giving just one piece of the puzzle that goes into a decision-making framework. So we need to be considering, we have the water quality outcomes. That's the main piece that the WQBE toolkit's helping support, really characterizing what can we expect for our investments as far as on the ground improvements in water quality. But we also need to have a frame for how we're considering equity and social justice in our decisions, regulatory requirements we have, what the financial implications are going to be for our ratepayers, and how we're being sustainable over time, along with other considerations. So you're going to hear us talking really just about the characterizing those water quality outcomes and not so much about all the other pieces, because that's what the WQBE toolkit feeds into other decision-making frameworks. So just an overview of what's included in the WQBE toolkit. We have kind of three main sets of models. The first are pollutant loading models, helping us look at currently where are pollutants coming from across King County. Then we have our sustain models. Those are cost-effective optimization models for stormwater programs specifically. So answering how can we cost-effectively manage stormwater volumes and pollutants. And then we are looking to connect the possible actions we could take to the outcomes we could expect for people, salmon, and orca. So we have causal models, so basically the cause and effect models that are helping look at what are all the different factors that are affecting how people interact with water. So are swimming beaches open? Can people safely harvest shellfish? Can they safely eat fish from our waterways? And then also looking at how water quality issues feed into the larger threats that are facing southern resident orcas and our Chinook salmon. Today, we're going to really be focusing on the stormwater models. So you're really going to hear us talking about sustain today. And one of the key things about sustain is it's helping us, it's kind of different than the previous talks we had. They're getting really on the ground, where you can know a lot about your site, really dig in deep. This is trying to do higher level planning, and King County is really vast. And so we're trying to do at a high level, look at what sort of goals can we set for our stormwater management? Can we estimate the outcomes we could get from a larger scale stormwater program, estimate what the costs would be, and then start to drill into informing those actual, the specific actions we would take on the ground. But it is like a higher level planning work that we're doing. And I'm going to pass it over to Stephanie to talk more about it. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? If I don't use a microphone? Okay. I'm going to set this right here. All right, show of hands, has anybody heard of sustain before or used sustain before? Knows what it is? Okay, great. Like maybe half of you. So Sustain has been around since about 2014, stands for the System for Urban Stormwater Treatment and Analysis Integration. It was developed by or with the EPA, and it really answers the question, how can we cost effectively manage stormwater volume and pollutants? So a cost benefit analysis almost. And cost is something we're all probably pretty worried about. And I want to talk a little bit about what goes into Sustain. How did we build the Sustain model for King County? And the building blocks for Sustain are what we call actions or stormwater BMPs. I'm going to use the terms interchangeably. And so we have each of these actions or BMPs that we've developed. We've got green stormwater infrastructure BMPs, like rain gardens, there's gray infrastructure, as well as regional stormwater parks. And each one of the BMPs that we've developed for our modeling purposes has three components to it. So design, cost, and performance. So performance is, what sort of pollutant reduction are we going to get or do we expect out of this type of BMP? And then cost. So we're looking at a 30-year life cycle cost. So what does it cost to put it in the ground and maintain it for 30 years? And then also design, how big is it? And we're looking at a retrofit situation, right? So, what are the sizes of the BMPs that we're talking about putting in? And so all of these actions fit into one of three categories that we call programs. We have a GSI Green Stormwater Infrastructure Incentives Program. We have a Roadway Stormwater Treatment Program and a Regional Stormwater Treatment Program. So these three different programs. And the programs have a set of assumptions about them as well. So there's action opportunity. Where can we put the type of BMPs that we're talking about? So for example, in our GSI Incentives program, we have rain gardens. And in our model, we said rain gardens can only go in low density residential areas. And then we also have technical constraints. We might not have, for example, for our roadway treatment program, we might not have space for some of the different actions that we're talking about. And we have to take that into consideration too. And another really important part of each of these programs is assumed participation, right? So if we go back to the rain gardens, we know that not everybody is going to want to put in or maintain a rain garden on their property. Or if we're looking at a regional stormwater treatment program and we want to put it on private land, people might not want to sell their property to us. So those are all considerations that go into the Sustain modeling. All right, and so this graph looks kind of, graph looks kind of confusing at first. So I'm going to walk you through how to read it, but this is a Sustain curve or a cost effectiveness curve. This is for the Green Duwamish Basin. It's the roadway treatment program. We've optimized it for the model for sediment reduction. So we're looking at % reduction of TSS along the x-axis here along the bottom. So you can see we go from 0 to about 2.2%. On this y-axis on the right, we're looking at capacity in acre feet, and that corresponds to these color blocks right here. And then finally on the right y-axis, or actually that's left, sorry, we're getting it backwards. That's cost, and the cost corresponds to this red line right here. All right, and so we can see that these, like I said, these color blocks correspond to different BMPs that match to the capacity axis. So we can see bioretention in this teal color, media filter drain in this darker blue color. So that's how you read a graph like this. You can also see a handful, it might not be super clear, of other actions that are sort of lumped in the top right there, like high rate underground filter and bioretention filter as well. And so with Sustain, one of the things that you do is we take what's called a slice or a package. All right, so we can pick a point along this cost curve, and we can see that if we go straight down to the x-axis, this point we get about a 2% reduction in TSS for the entire Green Duwamish Basin. And then if we look along to the cost portion of the axis, we can see that this would cost about $700 million in the Green Duwamish to implement this program. And by implement this program, I mean all this amount of media filter drain, this amount of bioretention, as well as these other, little slices up at the top that are a little bit more difficult to see. And so I really want to drill down into more information that Sustain gives you. So I think I said like 2% for $700 million, and that sounds really scary. But I do want to draw your attention to the TSS reduction in pounds. So this is for the Green Duwamish, and this is annually. That's a lot. 2% is a lot of reduction annually in the Green Duwamish, even though it sounds a little bit scary. So this is a heat map of TSS reduction for this specific package. And we can zoom in a little bit and we can see maybe we're trying to prioritize our projects, or where do we start if we want to hit this goal. And I might zoom in on this darker green sub watershed. And in that sub watershed, Sustain is telling us to get this reduction that we're looking for this entire 2% program in the Green Duwamish, we would need this amount of, 24 bioretention actions and 5 bioretention planners, and then 225 media filter drains. And so we can even break that down a little bit further and look at the almost where, so it doesn't cite the actions, but what it does tell you is these are most effective near highways and till soil, for example. All right. So from our Sustain modeling, we modeled these 3 different programs across 5 basins in King County. So all the basins with major receiving waters in King County. And looking at all the programs across all the basins, there were 3 kind of key takeaways or main findings that we had. The first is that the regional stormwater parks are worth the investment. And again, with that whole cost thing, that's sort of a scary statement. And this is the Manchester facility in Kitsap County, and you can see it's a really nice green open space. So we've started calling them stormwater parks instead of stormwater facilities, because facility sounds not as cool as this picture looks. And so this is the Sustain curve for the regional facilities program. Again, it's the Green Duwamish. We've optimized it for sediment reduction. And you can see that for about $500 million, we can get a 42% reduction in TSS. And if you remember back to what I was talking about with Roadway Treatment program, for $700 million, we could get a 2% reduction. So this is an order of magnitude larger. And so again, just comparing across the programs for this $500 million package, what is the percent reduction that we get? And regional facilities is over 40%, and Roadway Treatment and GSI Incentives are less than 10% each. And this is a pretty significant finding, and we were surprised by it. So with that, I wanted to talk about some limitations. So we haven't looked at flow control yet. This is just for water quality, and we acknowledge that flow control might look different if that's a big priority. When we did this modeling, we initially only looked at public facilities, and we found that that wasn't really hitting the mark. So it's really important where we're citing these regional stormwater facilities. They have to be at the bottom of the sub-watershed or the bottom of the catchment to be really effective. And in fact, these facilities are so effective, Sustain wanted us initially to put multiple in one sub-watershed or one catchment. And we realized that's probably not feasible. It's hard enough to cite these as it is. So we limited it to, in our modeling, one facility or one park per sub-watershed. So these are just some modeling constraints that we wanted to make sure you're aware of. Key finding number 2 is that model assumptions and opportunity constraints really matter. So anybody who's a modeler knows that, but there's something really interesting about this GSI Incentives program that I want to point out is that we get a really low, less than 5% TSS reduction in the Green Duwamish, but we assumed really low participation, or what we call a realistic participation value. And so we assumed that not a lot of people would want to put this on their facility or in their property or maintain it over a long period of time. And so if we change this number to 100% participation and everybody participates, we get over a 10% reduction in TSS. And that's a more impressive number. So it probably really depends on your community, and assumptions like that really matter when it comes to stormwater modeling. Key finding number 3 is don't forget about co-benefits. And here's what we mean by that. So these regional stormwater facilities should really go at the bottom of a watershed or a bottom of a sub-catchment. And that's great, right? You're able to treat everything downstream. But what about upstream, right? There's fish upstream, there's people upstream, there's communities upstream. And if the water quality is lower upstream, that still matters to us. So we know that it's important, even though it might not be, you know, what the model says is the most cost-effective thing to do, to have roadway treatment and to have GSI programs spread throughout your watershed or throughout your catchment, because that matters to hitting our goals, right? If we're concerned about people, salmon, and orca, then we can't just be letting all the dirty water go to the bottom and then treating it there. And so we are also really interested in this upstream benefit. And I'm going to turn it back over to Carly here.
All right. I'm not confident I'm as loud as Stephanie can be, so I'm gonna use the microphone again. So I just wanted to bring it back to talk a little bit about how this gets used. So Stephanie shared those key 3 pieces, and I had described before that this goes back into a larger decision-making framework, right? We can't, like Stephanie was describing, we can't just take what the model says. The model is optimizing specifically to what you tell it to optimize to. So if we're optimizing to TSS reduction, it is telling you this is the most cost-effective thing you could do to get that the most TSS reduction, but we know that we have a suite of things that we care about that is not just TSS reduction. So it goes back into a larger piece, but it can still be useful to help us set those goals, understand what's possible, right? So looking at setting expectations about how much reduction we could get for different types of programs, estimating those costs, estimating outcomes, and that can help inform our actions. So one way this is getting used right now is through the stormwater investment plan that King County is working on. You might have heard Stormwater Summit, and John Brosnan is going to talk about this at 11, I think, in the same room. So you can hear a little bit more about that. But I was just going to give a preview of some of the modeling that's helped support that work. One of the things they're working on is putting together what are some ambitious and inspiring goals that we can put forward for actions that thinking about implementing stormwater BMPs. What are some goals as a region that we could get behind? And one of those goals that they're working on right now is provisionally build 30 strategically sited regional stormwater parks across the King County region. So that's all partners in the region working towards 30 stormwater parks over the next 30 years. And that is informed in part by us looking at how cost effective these are. It's also a type of project that needs a lot of cooperation, needs a lot of work across jurisdictions oftentimes. And so this is a great, that's a good venue to help us work towards really getting more of these in the ground. And so some of the WQBE modeling that is supporting this is, you can say 30 strategically sited 30 regional stormwater parks could be around 500 million over 30 years. We are going to be updating our cost of it because, as we were hearing in the previous, the costs are going up, and this was these are 2019 dollars, so we will be looking at that. But roughly 500 million over 30 years. That's to build and maintain 30 regional stormwater parks. We can also think about the outcomes that we could get for that. So if you were really to site these in a way that you could really route a good amount of water from your local watersheds, you could treat 7 billion gallons of stormwater each year and remove 40% of the PCBs in those local watersheds where they are sited. So that can help really galvanize why these would be so important. And even though there can be a hard lift, really help push why that would be worth the investment. Oh, I was going to say, we can bringing back in those causal models that I haven't talked about, but we can look at how, if we have 40% PCB reduction in these local waterways, what would that mean for really improving the safety of PCBs are important for people eating fish. We have fish consumption advisories across King County for PCBs. So how close are we getting to people being able to more safely eat fish in the county? And they're also important contaminants for our southern resident orca. So some things that are coming up, we are going to be updating our website in the next couple months to share out some of these findings so they're easier to find, be able to contact us easier. We want to share the data behind this if you're interested in dialing into a particular area in your jurisdiction, for instance, and see what Sustain was saying was really cost effective for these 3 programs for TSS reduction. That's something we have available now. We'd be happy to meet with you and we can actually go up and down on those curves and look at how look at what Sustain is saying would be really cost effective in your area. We're also starting to model flow control. So that was something that's missing so far. We're going to be looking at optimizing flow control over this year and next year. And then into the future, we plan to maintain these models. We want these to be useful to the region in the future. So we're going to be incorporating climate change directly into the models in 2025. And then beyond that, we're really interested in partnering to use these for new analyses over time. With that, we have so many people who have helped work on this project. I think we're available for questions.
Thank you both. Any questions?
I can project.
Yeah.
I have a few questions, or a question about how you're organized in your municipality. Who runs the model? Who owns the model? How do you get the data? How do you fund, those things?
Okay, so a question of how King County is organized for funding this work and maintaining this work. And it is complicated. So Stephanie and I are in this really unique section that's called the Science and Technical Support section. And it is within Water and Land Resources Division, but we support both. I do most of support for stormwater and our wastewater division as well. And a lot of our funding comes both from stormwater and wastewater. And this project is funded by wastewater and stormwater. Part of this is I'm sharing about the stormwater piece, but we're also going to be doing some modeling in the combined sewer systems in within King County to look at flow control there. So it's looking at how can we leverage work that's beneficial to wastewater and also stormwater. As far as maintaining the models, that's going to be sitting in the science section because that's our role, is to provide this scientific support for the divisions. And as far as who's paying for that, that is a lot of our operating comes from wastewater, but there's some stormwater fees that go into it as well. It's kind of mixed together. So it's unique.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
So as far as the Sustain model, is that publicly available? And I guess like starting from scratch, like maybe you guys don't know exactly, but what does it look like as far as like cost and time getting everything set up?
Yeah, okay, so thinking about, is Sustain publicly available and what's the kind of startup cost for starting something like that? Sustain is publicly available. We have the specific models to actually like have the model yourself and run it that's a big effort to port it over. We are getting it in-house within King County right now. That our consultant team has it, but that we'll have access to it in-house so that we can make modifications over time. We can run the models ourselves. So that's happening this year. It is a big startup cost, so we are hoping that we're open to partnering with other jurisdictions on a project to use the Sustain models for a more specific question. So we're open to doing that and figuring out either grant or other ways to pay for that type of work. So that's how it's available. As far as the data that we have and from the runs and Sustain we've already done, that we want just to be available. It's not it's a lot of data, so just having it available online without context around it, we decided wasn't probably helpful. But we have ways that we can have a meeting and give you data, talk through it, and give you data. So that's kind of where it is as far as availability. And for Sustain, there's ways to make it more or less complicated. I would say that we did go pretty deep in this, and it was a big cost. So I don't know kind of the full range of how it could be done, but we it was over $1 million to be putting together the Sustain modeling.
But it is publicly available. It was originally developed by the EPA, and you can also run Sustain in a much smaller area, and we have a very large area with a lot of different variables. But if you have a really technical person on your staff, then it would be possible to do something like that, like in-house perhaps.
Art Nelson, City of Kennewick. Because flow control has such a strong influence on TSS, especially at the high flow rates, do you see, as you start to do your flow modeling, do you see going back into your treatment model to try and correlate the two, find additional gains?
Great, so thinking about as we do our flow control analysis, are we going to go back and look at the TSS because those are going to be really related? So we didn't go into the details of how Sustain works, but it does do time series flow modeling. So it's actually modeling those BMPs and thinking about how much for each storm that comes through, how much of that bypasses, how long is it staying, what's the infiltration. So it's pretty detailed in its modeling. So it has already taken into account the flow that goes through those BMPs to give us those TSS reductions that we got. But it's really about the programs, the conceptual programs that we set into Sustain didn't include some of the like big regional ponds and things like that would end up maybe holding more water. So you have less bypass downstream to get better TSS reductions. So when we do the optimization for flow control, Sustain will be optimizing for flow control, but we can still look at what the TSS reduction of that flow control program would be, and as well as the other pollutants. And so we plan to do that. We have talked about maybe kind of doing a kitchen sink modeling in the future to include everything and optimize for different pieces. But I think it will be really interesting to see just if we optimize for flow control, what the answer is for TSS. And if we get something that maybe is better than what we had seen before, I wouldn't be surprised, and we can share out about that.
Any other questions? Right.
If you just a brief response is fine. Where are your costs with running the model? Is it consultant fees? Is it collecting input data?
Yeah, so we had that, let's see. So cost, where are the costs coming from? And a lot of it is the putting together what are the assumptions around these BMPs. We had 30 something BMPs that we modeled out, and it was a really detailed effort to decide what is a good unit for that, what's going to be the design, what's the performance that we're assuming. We looked at local cost effectiveness or not cost BMP effectiveness data to look at how these actually perform in the ground. It was the costing that we did bottom up cost estimates to really get into what we really think the cost would be for these. There's ways to do those inputs much more simply. We did go pretty deep with it. We also tried to involve a lot of folks within King County to help with those estimates, and then we were also bringing in we did a few webinars to talk through what we were working on. So we had kind of a whole infrastructure around it, as well as developing the models and also making sure that we can bring them in-house and use them into the future. So there's a lot of kind of forward planning with it as well. Yeah.
Watch it, but we might be at 9.
It's 9:35.
Oh, okay. I still have 5 more minutes for questions. Yeah.
I can project that. What was the high rate underground filter? Is that a storm filter? Is that CDS units?
Let's see, the high rate filter. I know that one of those is based off the Filterra.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's the one.
The high rate media filter drain. Yeah, I think that's using Filterra. That assumed using Filterra data because we had local stormwater projects with information about that. Yeah.
So did you have flow monitoring, or was it just like other parameters you used?
So the consultant that we worked with had worked on a number of these projects with a high rate media filter drains. And so we use data from that. So yeah, monitoring. And then I'm trying to think, so we use the international BMP database for like other assumptions for other BMPs, but where we had local studies, we used local studies.
Yeah, so we're using existing monitoring that's already out there for the ones rather than us. So that's where it's kind of at a screening level. We're not actually at a specific site to see how will this BMP perform at this specific site. It's trying to make a generalized assumption that you can put across it. Well, if it's in till soil in general, how is it going to do if it's in? Right. So that's kind of the way it went.
So it doesn't actually do any dynamic modeling. It's more of a input output performance kind of a base thing.
It is modeling the storms going through it, but
does it create hydrographs then?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
kind of what we didn't mention is we created a hydrology model and water quality model. And we did a 20-year baseline period for King County. And that was using LSPC. And which is a version of HSPF, if you're familiar with hydrology models. Yeah, and so we have a 20-year time series for King County, and that's what goes into sustain. It is informing those initial the initial conditions pre-actions.
Yeah, so you have a hydrograph for before BMPs, and then sustain is trying out, I feel like we could describe this more, that sustain is trying out thousands of different combinations of BMPs, all the different options, and it's seeing what is the cost and the reduction that you get for those, and then it's sharing with you the ones that are you get the most reduction for that cost, but you get a new hydrograph on that output.
I think we're out of time. I think we're
Yeah.
over.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.